Hey, what up? So back with another deck update profile thingy. Yeah, so I made a couple of changes since my last event. I didn't go to Modern this week because I was kind of busy and was a little lazy, and I was waiting for some cards to come in. So I didn't go to Modern this week, but I did get the cards I wanted to try out in the deck. So I'm gonna do a small deck profile update, talk about some changes, talk about some ideas, and yeah. So yeah, as you know, I've been playing essentially blue-white control for a better part of a year, and I've learned a lot of things and um, evolve as a player. And so um, this is once again just a deck that I like to play. It's not the best variation. There's plenty of other ways to play the deck. Plenty of other tech choices and things you could do, but specifically, I like playing Esper versus just a regular blue-white control deck. And the main idea here is now we're kind of slowly moving away from Esper. We're not having as many black cards. Um, because our entire mana base nowadays is just splashable colors. Like that's what modern has kind of become. It's become a format of where you can play 5 color decks and be okay. And so even though I say this deck is primarily Esper, it's essentially just kind of a 5 color control deck with splashable elements here and there. Because our mana base does kind of um, cover that, and it's a very, you can say it's a pretty greedy mana base. And so, um, but with greedy mana base, sorry, it does allow me to play a bunch of other cards that you normally wouldn't be able to play, and kind of opens up different lines of plays, different tech cards and stuff like that. The deck itself hasn't changed too much. Mainly, the new card I added in was Domain. I definitely wanted to try out Domain because it is kind of like the hot card of the format right now. And Domain is typically only really playable in Modern. Because Modern allows for those greedy mana bases with the fetch lands, red and six. You have plenty of ways to kind of correct your mana base, get the colors that you need. Um, you have access to trinomes, which trinomes with the release of the last 5 trinomes, essentially 5 colors is just everywhere now. You only really play like 2 or 3 colors if your deck is just dedicated to that one particular color, like Boros Burn, or something like that. Otherwise, most decks are playing like 2 to 3 colors, and if not 5, just colors. It's just like low to the ground decks are probably playing 2 colors, but anything like mid range or higher is playing like 5 colors. So that's just the nature of the format now, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Like you're punished for not playing 5 colors versus and sometimes 5 color 80 card decks are more consistent than your normal 60 card 2 color decks. So that's just kind of an interesting thought. There's discussion of, oh, maybe we should ban red and six, which might help hit those 5 color decks. You can ban trinomes, and I guess it'll be like the opposite of Pioneer. If you ban trinomes in Modern, it's like banning the fetch lands in Pioneer. So um, you know those are some like train of thoughts there. Or you build a deck that preys upon greedy mana base. So you build a deck that plays Blood Moon, Magnus, of the Moon, stuff like that, where you punish people's really really greedy colors, or you play more things like, I don't know, Spreading Seas maybe, hit those tri lands, make them islands, stuff like that. So there's a couple of philosophies you can do to kind of attack people's mana base, because greedy mana base, 5 colors, and the fact that it's consistent, it's just kind of crazy. And um, because even though they're playing 5 colors, they're still a really fast. They don't have a fast clock, but they have like good answers, especially with like Domain now being a thing. The nature of like um, Leyline just allows you to play those really greedy mana bases and not get punished by something like a Ragavan. Because obviously when you're playing Tri-lands, they're coming in tap, and you usually don't have an answer turn 1 or turn 2 for like a Ragavan or something like that. But because you're playing domain, or you enable domain by turn 2, you're practically kind of like safe from any early on threats, and it allows you to kind of build that your mana base to get to that mid range, to get to that sort of late game presence where your deck, like 5-color Omnath will eventually just win once they get to that 5th or 6th land. In either case, I'm not talking about the meta. Let's talk about some of the changes I made to the deck and go from there. So from my last video, I had an interest in playing 5 colors essentially. It's honestly just 2 lands that give me colors that I normally don't use. So it's Steam Vents giving me red, and the new Sparrow Headquarter, which gives me green. Now typically that would only really matter in this deck if I wanted to play like Prismatic Ending. I can Prismatic Ending for 4 colors or 5 colors. Nowadays I can Prismatic Ending for 5 colors, which doesn't really make it Prismatic Ending that much better. Namely because Prismatic Ending, I'm usually only hitting 1 or 2 mana things, maybe 3 mana, sometimes 4 mana if I am behind or I'm really ahead. I can maybe hit like an Omnath for 4 mana, hit a Jace or something like that. But typically, most of the ranges of threats that Prismatic Ending kills is between 1 to 3 mana. Now, adding a 5th color, obviously, I can hit Solitudes. I can hit Fury. I can hit other big 5 mana Teferis, stuff like that, I guess. I still can't answer some like 6 mana stuff. I like the thing that Prismatic can't get rid of is Leyline Binding, ironically. So I needed an answer to Leyline Binding, and the good answer to Leyline Binding is Leyline Binding, ironically. Because there's not any card in the deck that can permanently get rid of Leyline Binding. I can play Teferi, I can bounce their Leyline Binding back to their hand, but they can just play it again, so it doesn't really solve it, that issue. And so yeah, that's why the inclusion of Leyline Binding, because its popularity right now is so high that you kind of have to play Leyline Binding, otherwise you lose to other Leyline Bindings. But yeah, first off, let's just start with the 1 mana. I guess the 1 mana. So not much has changed. I still have 4 Prismatic, especially more relevant now just because it's, I guess, I got the 5 colors, which makes it a little bit better. But yeah, so that hasn't changed. I'm still playing Ops. So idea now with the Ops would be to try to fix my mana, or to get my fetch lands and stuff like that to fix my mana. So there's 2 school of thoughts here. School of thought is you can get rid of the Ops and just main deck Challenge the Void, and maybe play an additional fetch land or 2 or something like that. So you can play like 25 lands, and then like maybe 3 chalices or 2 chalice or whatever. Main reason I don't like that is I don't like main decking chalice because it's while it's a great card, there are certain just matchups where it's just not that great against. From my experience, it's always going to be relevant because most decks are going to have a 1 mana play, some sort of 1 mana play, but not always 0 mana. But most decks will have a 1 mana play. But I think by turn 2, unless I know I'm going against a deck that is playing a ton of 1 mana spells, I'd rather just keep my 2 mana open for a regular counter spell or something on turn 2. So that's why I don't like Chalice main deck. And on top of that, I'm playing Snapcaster, so Op makes Snapcasters a lot better. So I still like Snapcaster. Some people don't. It's kind of in and out of the format. I always found that it allows me to actually win in a timely fashion, just because I can kind of outgrind my opponent and still apply a lot of pressure to them. So that's why I still like the Snapcaster, and that's why I still like the Ops over main decking Chalice there. The 2 mana spells basically the same. 2 dam, 3 snaps, and 4 counter spells. I decided to cut snaps down to 3 again. I did like him at 4. I definitely still like him. The only reason I cut it down because I wanted to try out Leyline and see how that works. Because I'm removing some of those cheap cards that you can cast with Snapcaster. That's why I decided to just kind of down him to 3, and then have like more Leyline available to me to play. Because obviously you cannot flashback a Leyline of the Void, or sorry, Leyline of Binding, unfortunately. But I still like Snap as a engine and as eventually a win condition. So yeah, 3 snaps for now, until further noticed. And then our 3 mana counters, 3 mana slots have still not changed too much. Yeah, this is just a kind of a solid lineup from my perspective. I think 3 Ravelers has been pretty good. 4 Ravelers seem too much. Sometimes you draw too many of them and you just can't do anything, or they can't answer the present state of the board, or they get kind of cloggy in your hand. So I like 3, and then 4 Archmage is like a must. Like Archmage has been probably our best card in our deck, honestly. Allows you to draw, allows you to draw a ton of cards. Like with Snapcaster and Archmage Charm, you're drawing so many cards, it's crazy. You don't really counter stuff with it. Like you'll counter stuff when you're out of counter spells and you need to counter something, like a Blood Moon or something like that. But most of the time I just use Archmage Charms to draw a ton. Kai's Guile is still great, still catches a lot of decks off guard with it. And yeah, for two copies, not too bad. You can cut it down to 1 if you like. I still like my 2 copies of Kai's Guile. Alright, so 4 mana still hasn't changed too much. Now, there's a school of thought here. I know a lot of people have slowly been kind of rotating the Emperor out of their blue-white control deck, and they started to put 2 Jaces back. So they're playing 2 Jaces and like 0 Emperors. In this particular build, or in my opinion, you could do that. You could cut out 1 Emperor and play two Jace maybe, or you cut out Emperor completely, or you play 1 of each and put in a 4th Leyline Binding. Because right now I'm only playing 3 Leyline Binding. I still like the Emperor, mainly because against a lot of matchups where I just start going really wide with the Emperor, that's where I kind of apply a ton of pressure with it. While I like Jace, like he's a good win condition, sometimes I play 4 mana and he just dies. It doesn't feel too good. And I think he's a little slow in my opinion to be a win condition. But if you do resolve him and he doesn't get removed, obviously you will win. But I like the Emperor, just putting bodies on the board, removing stuff. Like she's saved me a few times too, like just flashing her in and exiling something and gaining some life. So I'll still stick with 2, I think. But you can definitely cut 1 out and play a second Jace, or play a Leyline Binding is the other option. Or completely cut her out. But I still like the 1 of at minimum of the Emperor in the deck. Especially if you're playing like Snapcaster or even Shark Typhoon. Just being able to snap her in and then powering up your giving first strike to your Snapcaster or giving first strike to your Shark Typhoon is sometimes a blowout against certain decks if they like carelessly attack into you or something like that. Real strong effects in that sense. Then for our 5 mana lineup, still pretty much the same. You could same ideas. Like if you don't like more Leyline Binding, or you don't like the Emperor, you can put in another Solitude if you want. If you don't like Snapcasters, you can play 4 Solitude. That's fine. I don't recommend 4 Solitude unless you're playing Kahira, because it gets really pricey to invoke the Solitude. So if you were to play 4 Solitude and cut out Snapcasters, then definitely I would play Kahira in the sideboard, so you can at least add it to your hand and use Solitude for free. But yeah, I still like Snapcaster, so I'm still just kind of keeping Solitude at 2. Alright, so yeah, in the last cards here we got are the Leyline Binding. So I'm playing 3 copies right now. I'm going to test them out at 3. I think three is a good number. Like, I don't want too many of them in my opening hands. It can get cloggy, especially if my deck is not designed to like consistently get domain by turn, like 2 or 3. Leyline binding can clog your hand. That's what that's the theory behind it. As you see, I'll talk about my mana base in a bit, but yeah, like I mentioned, my mana base, it's set up to get at least 4 land types by turn 2, but even so, you're not always gonna be able to. So I think Leyline Binding, a 3 copy in my deck is good enough. I can always get at least 3 types, swamp, plains, and island. So Land Binding is always a decent 3 mana removal. But getting the 4th and 5th color can be a little sketchy in the deck sometimes. So that's why I think 3 is going to be a good number here. I've yet to test play the deck, so next time I go out to Modern, I'll obviously play it and let you guys know how that goes. But for now, I'm going to just go stick with 3 there. Alright, mana base time. So let's talk about the changes. Well, there's only one real change, but I did mention you could play more like fetches and stuff. So the main change is I took out a plains and I added in Spara's headquarters. So that gives me the green now. So I'm playing 2 trinomes with a total of 8 fetches. So if you wanted to, you could bump the fetch lands to 9. You could add in like a Misty Forest or Scarving Tarn. Right now, I'm still only playing the 8 fetches. Because I'm playing Opt, that should allow me to, in theory, find either one of these lands or a fetch land using the Opt, or maybe Opt Snap Opt sort of thing. So that's the theory. So I'm still playing 24 lands, 4 Ops. So if you think about it, each 2 Ops is a land. So I'm playing essentially 26 lands. And so yeah, there is a card that you could potentially cut out. So the rest of my mana base is more or less the same. I only have 4 basics now, so I'm a little bit more weak to Blood Moon once again. But I think I'm experienced enough to kind of play around the Blood Moon. But we'll see. And then the rest of the mana base is still the same. Still got the 2-man lands here. Still the 3 the filter lands, and then the shock lands. So here you go. So the shock lands, or the land types, this will give me any steam vents paired with any of these will give me 4 domain. So but if I get like this plus maybe a swamp, this will give me a domain exactly. So or obviously you do this, and that's still good enough. But yeah, ideally what you want is to at least try to get these 3 lands on the board to enable domain. Now, like I mentioned, you might not need another Watery Graves. Honestly, you might want to play like a 9th fetch land instead. So that would bring your fetchables, your fetch lands, or your fetchable lands, I think, to 10. And then you would have 9 fetch lands. Right now I'm running 11 fetchables, so 11 fetchable lands, and then 8 fetch lands to fetch those 11. But yeah, so you could down 1 fetchables and up another fetch lands. I don't know if that's gonna be any good or not. Now, the only issue with that is I guess if you're playing against like a Karn Silac or something like that, then you might be screwed, because then you won't be able to fetch any of your lands. But obviously Tron is not very popular, but Karn himself is a popular card, and there's a potential for them to like bringing a cyborg in a Karn Silac or something. But yeah, in my opinion, I think 5 Shocklands still nice to have. So I still like the 8 plus the 11 fetchables here. So the other four fetchables would be these basics. So you have a total of, yeah, 11 here. Um, Now the main issue is if you open up with fetch lands, what do you fetch first? Um, Now my answer here is gonna be it depends on your hand. If you have domain, then you probably want to search Spotter's headquarters because there's a good chance you're gonna be fetching water graves or steam vents. So Spotter's headquarters, if you open up with like a domain in hand, if you open up with like a Kai's Guile or maybe you open up with like a dam, then I would fetch Rafine's Tower. So why not? So yeah, honestly, it just depends on the cards you have in your opening hands. Typically, yeah, I'd spend my turn one just fetching these cards out of the way. Um, Now, if you have like a slow hand or you have a greedy hand, you have opt, then yes, you don't have to fetch this at all. You can just leave this for later. You can fetch a basic or a shock land to play the opt. So that's another thing that you can think about too. Is if you plan on having no plays turn one at all, then yes, you can just take out the ops and always fetch a tri land or something like that. If you don't plan on having a turn one play, if you're playing Chalice the Void in the main, that would be something you could potentially do here. And like I mentioned, it's all up to experimental and personal preference at this point. But this mana base, at least from my initial hand shuffling and kind of just playing around with my deck, seems okay. Seems like it would work. Yeah, it's gonna suck if you draw these in your opening hand, but you can just still play them, or you can cycle them later if you really need, if you really wanted to. It's not a huge deal, I think. There are some times where you need critical mana and you get one of these. It's gonna definitely suck. You're gonna be down, essentially down a land for the turn. But I think that's just the cost of playing Leyline Binding, the opportunity cost, or just the cost in general. If you want to play a good removal spell, you're gonna need a greedy mana base. Now you could potentially not place this and you play like a breeding pool or something, but I don't think it's really worth it to play a breeding pool. If you have like the other fetch land, the other tri land, the Jeskai one, then instead of steam vents, you can play breeding pool for sure. But I think with this amount of fetchables and with this amount of like color variations, I think I should be able to, in theory, get out 3 land types by turn 2, maybe 4 by or all 5 by turn 3. So yeah, I have a good feeling about the mana base. I'm not too worried, but those are some concerns, some points that you may want to think about when playing a deck like this. And like I mentioned, if you don't play the op, you can play another fetch land, you can play another basic or something, bump up the land to 25. I wouldn't go past 25 lands, I don't think, because then you'll start flooding yourself more often than not. And even with 24 lands, sometimes I flood myself, so it's kind of crazy. But yeah, so that's it for the main deck. I think Leyline will be here to stay for a while. I do think it's a little bit better than March because it can be cheaper. It can always be cheaper than March, because March typically you're paying negative mana to use its effect, unless you're hitting something that's 0 cost. But yeah, March is typically, while it's a great card, it does kind of suck when you have to pay additional mana, especially in a format where mana, like early mana, is just really tight. So yeah, I think domains could essentially just replace March with Otherworldly Light now. And yeah, so the other cool thing about domain is you can abuse it with Teferi. You can just bounce it back with Teferi and then just recast it. Now let's say your opponent has you took a Renin 6 with Leyline Binding. What you could do is like you could bounce back and your opponent plays another Renin 6, so there's one Renin 6 captured under Leyline and 1 and 6 on the board. You can Teferi bounce the Leyline and then force your opponent to choose one of their um, red and six. Once it goes back to their board, choose one of them to stay on the board, and the other will die, and then you can just ley line it again. So that's kind of a neat trick to keep in mind, something to do. Another trick you can also do is like if someone like captures your cards, so say like they captured a Solitude or they capture a Planeswalker or something, you can leyline their leyline and get your card back, and then trigger the card again. Or shuffle, or like if you get Big Teferi back, you can just -3 bounce their leyline. Now it's gone. Now then you have small baby Teferi, you can bounce this leyline back, and there's just a bunch of tricks you can kind of do with that. So pretty cool. And yeah, in general, leyline binding is basically impossible to remove. I don't know if there's any efficient way of removing this card. Initially, my thought was that it might not be that good because you can remove it, but the more I think about it, the more I play, I don't think there's any real efficient card outside of one card I can think of, and that's Boseiju. So it is weak to Boseiju, and maybe it's weak to like I don't know, Face Breaker or Foundation Breaker, or maybe Force of Vigor. But no one's gonna really play Force of Vigor or Foundation Breaker unless they're living end and they're siding it in against you, to counter side. But in general, I think Leyline Binding, the only other way to remove Leyline Binding is with like another Leyline Binding or Boseiju. There's no other real efficient way to do it, I think, because obviously Prismatic just can't hit it. You could play something like Esper Charm, I guess. You can Esper Charm away an opponent's Leyline Binding or something like that. But like I said, I don't know if it's really worth doing that for 3 mana, especially when Leyline Binding is like usually cast for like 1 or 2 mana. If you spend more than like 1 or 2 mana trying to get rid of Leyline Binding, then you're gonna be in a world of hurt, because you're gonna be playing from behind. But that's just my opinion there. Now let's talk about the side deck. I did change the side deck a little bit. Just some thoughts I had about it, thoughts about Leyline Binding, and just overall my difficulties playing against certain decks that swarm the board, namely Infinity. Sometimes Yawgmoth can be an issue, where they go so wide I just don't have enough time to like keep the board clear. So I added one card to the deck, side deck, that hopefully will answer that. And to kind of also deal with opposing leyline, I also added another card. And I'll kind of talk about some potential things you can do with the side deck here. So first off, 2 Chalices. I still like Chalice at 2. Just my opinion. It's always been good for me at 2. I never felt like I needed a 3rd copy. But you could play a 3rd copy in the side, or you can play 3 in the main. Like I said, if you don't like opt, then you can opt out, opt out to play the Chalices instead. But I think 2 Chalice for me has been working quite well, and I never felt like I needed a 3rd Chalice. So yeah, 2 Chalice here. I cut down Spellbomb to 1. There hasn't been that many graveyard decks lately that I've been playing against. I've been playing against more like just barfing out their hands onto the board and stuff like that. And in general, I usually have a decent matchup against like Living End anyways. And same thing with Murktide. I'm usually pretty decent against Murktide. So I think Spellbomb is definitely not as good as it can be. It's still a nice card to have out early game. You can play it. I've won games where I Chalice for 0 and then Spellbomb. And that kind of just locks my opponent from ever doing anything with their deck until they get rid of one of the 2 or both. And then that just buys me time to build up my mana and have up counter spells for Counterspell War. So, but yeah, I think 1 Spellbomb still might be good enough. You still sometimes run into Renegade decks like I don't know, like a combo deck or something, or a dredge deck or something that you need a little bit more Graveyard Hate, or you run into against a Breach deck or something. So it's nice to have Grave Hate. I definitely think Grave Hate still belongs in the deck somewhere, or in the side deck. I naturally have some Grave Hate through Kaya's Guile, so I'm not really super worried about overboarding on Graveyard Hate anymore. I feel confident in those graveyard matchups, so generally pretty good against them. So Yeah. And then yeah, still the triple Aethergust. Still, I think the best removal and answer to a lot of cards in the format. Yeah, it's a pseudo counterspell and a um, pseudo removal. So you can think of it like memory lapse, but specifically for red and green cards. So it's soft counters, um, or hard counters, I guess, depending how you think of soft versus hard there. Uh, yeah, still my favorite cards. It's my main way of outing Blood Moon too. So as long as I have one island on the board, one basic island, I should be able to out Blood Moon or Magnus. So that's why I think this card is very important in the deck, is to fight against Blood Moon. If you're not building your mana base to be weak against Blood or less weak against Blood Moon, I think Aethergust is a must then. Yeah. Vetoes for the combo decks. Really nice. Only main weakness is Veil Summers. So, but yeah, otherwise still a great card. And then, all right, now this is a card I'm gonna try out. Lavinia. Now, if you don't know what she or he does, I actually don't know if this is a female or a male. Either way, doesn't matter. Thoughts between why I'm playing this card now is to do, I guess, three things more or less. So actually just mainly two things. One is if I feel like I really need it, I could play it and it'd be an anti-leyline binding, I guess. So they can't leyline you until like turn 6. So which is nice, until at least until they have 6 lands. So if you play Lavinia, they can't leyline you. Great. If you're playing against Tron, they can't Ugin, or they can't Karn you, which is great. And then the last effect is the most important effect. It's essentially another Challenge the Void. So Lavinia is another Challenge the Void because she or he stops the 0 mana effects. What's also great about this, or I guess it chops the cascade effect. So it stops Glimpse of Tomorrow, Living End, and crashing footfalls, or crashing rhinos or whatever. Sorry, I had to burp a little bit there. But yeah, so it stops that. And another cool thing it does kind of stop is it stops the invoked elementals. So your opponent cannot invoke their elements, elemental, solitudes, grief, stuff like that. And it's great against scam decks too. So if you're playing against a scam deck, this card is definitely a nice card to have. If you're playing against invoke elementals, living end even, it stops their grief, which is nice. Stops their subtlety, which is nice. Stop their force of negation, which is also nice. So anything that they're trying to cast for free, it stops, which is kind of nice. So you can think of Lavinia as my third Chalice of the Void. The reason why I'm only playing one copy is because it is legendary, and so I don't want to like draw 2 copies in my opening hand or something like that. Yeah, 2 copies can be nice because it can add a bit of redundancy, but I already have a ton of redundancy with Chalice of the Void and Lavinia, so they kind of serve different purposes. So I'm gonna try out one Lavinia, see how that works, and yeah, and essentially kind of go from there. And it kind of hits Titan players a little bit, hits Summoner packs and Pack of Negation, I guess. So that's kind of nice also. But yeah, so Lavinia is just a tech card I'm going to be trying out. And then, yep, I have the 4th copy of Teferi, because Teferi is broken against certain matchups. You can resolve a Teferi, you're essentially going to win against certain matchups. So, a 4th copy, not great against every matchup, but most matchups. But he can get a little cloggy, but so I decided to side the 4th copy there. Kai's Guile, a 3rd copy, basically for Graveyard Hate, kill certain things. Kill Torok if you really need to kill a Torok. Kill like the troll thingy, exile Graveyard. It can catch your opponents off guard, because it's instant speed, so they most likely won't see it coming. Even if they do see it coming, it's hard to play around. So yeah, Kai's Guile has just overall been a nice card. It's been one of the best blue or best control card, I guess, even though it doesn't have any blue in it. I guess that's kind of nice though. They can't mystical dispute this. It's like impossible to mystical dispute this unless they're gonna spend 3 mana. But they can still spell pierce it, unfortunately. But yeah, still, so overall, one of my favorite black cards in the deck. And then here's another card that I'm going to be trying out here. Temporary Lockdown. Now I have 2 copies. I'm only playing one in my sideboard right now. But maybe in the future, if I feel like I need to, I can play 2 copies. But essentially, it's kind of like Leyline Binding on crack in the sense that it hits everything that's CMC 2 and less. Now, my deck in general doesn't have much on the board in the ways of low cost stuff. Like, the things I would hit myself would be like the Emperor tokens, maybe the Void, or my Spellbomb, or my Snapcaster, or maybe if I hit my own Lavinia. But Lavinia and Temporary Lockdown are are cards I probably wouldn't play with each other anyways. But yeah, and same thing with this. I wouldn't play Spellbomb with Lockdown generally. The card I might play with it is obviously Chalice the Void and Lockdown. I might play both of these in the same like deck. But anyways, the Temporary Lockdown, the idea behind it is it's gonna be kind of like either a Dress Down, or it's gonna be like a Fracturing Gust, but for cheaper, at 3 mana, which is nice. And it hits everything. It hits artifacts, enchantments, and stuff like that, except for lands, obviously. But yeah, but it hits all of that, which is kind of nice because we have lots of 1-for-1 removal, and if our opponents is just making like a bunch of constructs, or a bunch of getting free like 1/1s out on the board or something like that, our 1-for-1 removal like Prismatic Ending isn't going to be able to keep up with that. And so Temporary Lockdown is kind of nice in the sense it kind of hits everything all at once, resets the boards for you, and allows you to continue playing. It's kind of like a Farewell essentially. But Farewell is obviously too expensive to play, and Adrian Gust is borderline unplayable because it's also 5 mana. And then like board wipes are nice, like Supreme Verdict is nice, but Supreme Verdict doesn't always answer everything. It doesn't answer their artifacts that I can't touch. Like if they have like a Spring Leaf, or they have like Shadow Spear, Shadow Spear, or they have like a Hammer, Sigarda's Aid, stuff like that. That's what Supreme Verdict cannot hit. So this Temporary Lockdown is great against Hammer Time, great against Affinity, even good against Yawgmoth. Like if they have a bunch of mana dorks, and they have like the Young Wolf and the what's the other thing? The two mana vine thingy. I forgot the name of it. Grass or whatever. Stuff that when on death brings itself back with persist. Like if you verdict that, they come back. This is nice that you can just lock it down, and they just get rid of all of that. Now obviously it doesn't hit Grist, but it hits like the Grist tokens, which is nice. Hits a bunch of stuff like that. Its main weakness, it shares the same main weaknesses as Leyline Binding, in terms of that it's weak to other Leyline Bindings. It's weak to technically Prismatic Ending, because it can be prismatic the way. It's weak to Boseiju, so that's another thing. But typically, I think this might be kind of a fun card to play with, because if you say you play this really early in the game, and you seal maybe 1 or 2 things away, or a couple of tokens or something like that, and your opponent just leaves it alone and doesn't get rid of it, then if you have a Teferi, you can bounce this back and play it again, and just kind of reseal everything again, which is kind of nice. So that's just my thought on the Lockdown. Just another way to kind of control the board and kind of reset the board in your favor. And it's only 3 mana, so it's not like you're paying that much mana into it. And it doesn't really hit you, because all of your permanents are usually 3 mana and higher, except for Snapcaster and stuff like that. If you did seal away your own Snapcaster, you could, if this somehow leaves the board, your Snapcaster comes back, you can use its flashback effects. So yeah, it's just couple of things you can kind of cute plays you could potentially do with Temporary Lockdown there. And then yeah, I still have the Supreme Verdict, another uncounterable board wipe is nice. And then finally, just 2 Subtlety, still great cards. I still like it. yeah, and that's it for my side deck and main deck there. So um, hopefully some of those uh, choices I make will I'll be able to like see it in action. Once I go out and play, hopefully I'll be able to like side these cards in and let you know, the following week or whatever, how well they did, if I like them or if I didn't like them. But yeah, they're just kind of one ofs right now, kind of just you just tip of the iceberg, just test playing with them, seeing how that works out. Yeah, the leyline bindings, for now I think are going to be essentially a permanent addition to the deck, at least until maybe no one else plays leyline binding or another good removal comes out. But I think leyline binding is as good as it gets for the most part, at least in modern. Like this card doesn't really see play outside of that because in other formats it's really hard to get domain up, but in modern and legacy obviously you can really easily get domain up. But yeah, in like pioneer and standard, domain is almost impossible for the most part. But yeah, I think leyline binding has found a home here in modern. So if you're ever gonna go out to a big event, you should at least expect to see this in a lot of decks nowadays. Especially even majority of the top tier decks are playing 4 to 5 colors. They can obviously just play and splash in binding real easily, and so that's just something you have to keep in mind. So things that used to be like really hard to remove, like chalices, Teferi, stuff like that that used to be really hard to remove, have gotten a lot easier to remove, with the addition of the binding. And that's the other thing I like about the binding over March. If March of the Outer World could have hit Planeswalkers, then I would like it a lot. Namely because there's a lot of Planeswalkers that I just want to get rid of, but my only Planeswalker removal in the deck typically is only Prismatic Ending and my big mana 5 mana Teferi, or just attacking it over, which is kind of hard because my deck doesn't really produce that many creatures to attack with, unless I'm playing like Shark or something like that. But yeah, like with Leia and Binding, I can essentially get rid of like Ren and 6, 3 mana Teferi, 5 mana Teferi, or if they're playing Vivian, the Vivian combo, I can get rid of the 6 mana Vivian, or they're playing like Chandra, Awakening or something like that. Yeah, you just lay them buying it away for 1 or 2 mana, which is really really nice. And in those particular colors, they have to find an answer to binding. Otherwise, great card overall, and a great card to play against other leyline binding. Anyways, I think that's all I got for you guys. Hopefully, this was educational, and those are some of my thoughts moving forward. There are a couple of other RCQs that are coming up in my area, but unfortunately, I'm going to be busy this month, going elsewhere, seeing some concerts. Next month, I might be in Japan or something like that. So I don't know. I might bring my modern deck to Japan to play locals there, just because I know the modern scene is really big in Japan. Almost no one plays EDH in Japan. I think it's usually like Legacy or Modern, and maybe Pioneer and Standard might pick up there. But I know Modern has a huge scene in Japan, so I might bring my deck there to play, because a lot of Japanese players play with English cards too, from what I heard. But it's been a while since I've been back to Japan, and when I was in Japan several years ago, I wasn't playing Magic, so I had no idea if they were playing English cards or not. But in general, I have a pretty good idea of what most of the cards in Modern do. So, if playing against Japanese players shouldn't be that bad. Maybe the language barrier might be something that I have to overcome. But either way, should be a fun time if I do go, and if I do bring my Modern deck. I'll let you guys know how I do. Maybe I'll film something while I'm there. I think in Japan they're a little bit more acceptable to be like filming. I guess maybe if you ask them, they'll probably allow you to film. I haven't really filmed on my locals too much. It's kind of like a hassle to set up, really. And my own locals has their own, I think, channel and stuff that they do. So I don't want to siphon their content. So it's a little harder to film at my locals, but But yeah, but in Japan, I think it should be a little bit easier to do. Maybe so. Maybe I'll film some like in real life game. We'll see about that. Anyways, see you guys next time. You guys have a good one.